Hi everybody, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm continuing my video series on magic, and the topic of today's video is why does magic work and how does it work? So if you haven't watched my previous video on magic, I recommend you do so. I'll put a link in the description below, and that'll give you an idea of where I'm going with this video series. So just by way of summary, magic is the idea that you can formulate an intention, visualize that intention becoming a reality, and then focus with all of your willpower on that reality coming into manifestation, and then it happens. That in a nutshell is the principle of magic. It's sometimes spoken about in terms of the law of attraction. It's often talked about in terms of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and the proposition in Hermeticism of as above, so below. Below representing the microcosmic world of the human mind, and above representing the external universe. And if you create a pattern in your mind, you can replicate that in the external world. But yeah, it's basically just visualizing an outcome, projecting your intent, and bringing it into existence. And magic, as it truly is, as it's truly been practiced down through the ages, it's very different to magic as it's presented in fiction. So if you're familiar with fantasy stories or perhaps role-playing games, you'll be familiar with a concept of magic which involves waving your hands around or waving a wand around, and stuff just comes, sort of pops into existence out of thin air. That's not how magic really works. That's a really simplistic idea of magic. The way that magic really works is indistinguishable to the outsider from coincidence or serendipity. Things sort of just happen in everyday life in the way that they would happen normally, but it may be that the occurrence of that event is highly unlikely, or it's very improbable that certain people will be in the same place at the same time, or that certain people will be involved in a certain type of event. But there seems to be a pattern to the way that these synchronicities or serendipitous events unfold that is in keeping with the intent of how the magic user wanted the world to rearrange itself. So that basically is how magic works. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that you can't do anything that you want with magic. Magicians are not miracle workers. As my previous illustration just now has demonstrated, magic very much works within the bounds of the laws of nature. It does not defy the laws of nature. And that has been my experience time and time again as I've been engaged in magical workings. So what magic really does is it turns something that was a mere probability into something that is an actuality, and it changes circumstances in such a way that that probability can emerge as an actuality where before it couldn't. But in order for that to occur, something needs to be within that window of probability. It can't be out here, outside of that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to implement that change. And if you use magic and your technique is impeccable and you still can't obtain the result that you want, there's usually some wisdom to be gained in understanding why you're not able to get that thing and why it's not the time for you to have that thing. And perhaps there is more change that is necessary inside yourself before you're in a position to really be able to obtain that thing. Okay, so those are some ground rules. when we're talking about magic, broadly speaking, the way that it works in the world. But why? Why does this thing work? It's like a sci-fi story, the idea that somebody can use their mental powers or their willpower to affect such a direct change in the universe. How is such a thing possible? Well, there's a lot of people who believe that magic has a purely psychological explanation. Essentially, it's deep psychology. What you're doing when you engage in magic is you're hacking into your own mind. You're reprogramming your own mind with new beliefs and new affirmations, which will become self-fulfilling prophecies when you behave differently in the world and are better able to achieve the outcomes for yourself in a certain field of life that you couldn't achieve before. Perhaps people view you differently, and perhaps that leads to other opportunities presenting themselves. Perhaps you have a new confirmation bias programmed into your unconscious, and that leads you to notice things that you didn't notice before and follow that to some new situation that you would not have been in before, which in turn leads to you achieving the result that you wanted. So there's that explanation for magic. But then there's the other camp who believe that magic is something supernatural, that when you use magic, you're engaging with some kind of mysterious force or power or energy that is subtle, too subtle to detect with any of our instruments that we use to detect energies in the physical world, and that somehow is able to be directed by the magician and used to influence the fabric of reality and reshape it in some way. And sometimes this can happen through the intercession of other spiritual entities. Well, I've done my own investigation into this question. I've done loads of magical workings over the years, and I have meticulously recorded the conditions under which I engaged in each working, and also the result that came about after the working. So I've got quite a bit of data to work with. In terms of whether magic is supernatural or not supernatural, I don't really have much skin in that game. None of the claims that I would make about myself, nor the kinds of beliefs about the way the world is that I promulgate, are ones where it's necessary to believe in a supernatural aspect to existence. I've scrutinized much of what I believe to see whether it would rely on some supernatural explanation to be true, and in most all instances I've been able to find that there's a version of that concept that fits quite neatly into a worldview that doesn't challenge any of the assumptions that science currently makes about our universe. So I wanted to find out whether magic was supernatural or not, purely because I wanted to know. I wanted to get to the truth of the matter. I was curious about what was causing this phenomenon. And the result of my inquiries is this. Most of the time, yes, there is a purely psychological explanation for magic, and the outcome, the desired result of the working can be brought about purely by changing a psychological reality in my head. It doesn't have to extend to the world outside in order to affect the change that I'm trying to affect. But there have been some cases as well with magical workings that I've done which have been successful, where there's not a psychological explanation. Things have happened in the outside world which have no causal connection to anything that's going on inside my head. And they happen at the right time and in the right place for me to get my desired outcome. And in my inquiries, I took things even further after I had determined that there were certain workings which didn't have a psychological explanation. I actually looked into the statistical probability of that thing occurring by chance, and I also looked at the statistical probability of so many novel events occurring so frequently in one person's life. And the statistical probability of a certain outcome following the engaging in a certain magical working was far greater than pure chance. So that explanation was also eliminated. So how do you explain that? These are the kinds of phenomena that would be derided by a lot of mainstream physicists and sarcastically dismissed as spooky action at a distance. Except that it is that, but it's real. So how is that possible? I've puzzled and puzzled over this for years, and I still don't have an explanation. But I'll just cover some of the ways that people try to explain something like magic using our current understanding of the universe. And this applies to the law of attraction as well, which is really more the context in which these kinds of discussions happen. It's really in vogue, and it has been for at least a decade now, to try and use quantum physics to explain supernatural phenomena. One theory of quantum physics that has been used and abused in this context is the double slit experiment. So the gist of the double slit experiment is that you've got a photon wave traveling through some slits, and if waveform collapse hasn't occurred and that wave has not condensed into just a particle with a definite point in space and time, then when the photon moves through the slits in the experiment, there's kind of a surface behind the slits, and as the photon moves through the slits, it creates multiple lines as it moves through the slit, because there's multiple probabilities of where it might end up. Whereas if the wave has already collapsed into a particle, it only creates one line as it moves through the slit. So I hope I didn't butcher that explanation of the double slit experiment, but what it demonstrates is this phenomenon of waveform collapse. People who've done the double slit experiment have found that it is the act of observing the particle that causes waveform collapse and which causes it to appear as creating only one line as it moves through the slits, rather than several, which suggests that this act of observing the particle somehow contributes to it becoming an actuality instead of many potentialities. Now, we have to be careful using this experiment as proof of some kind of supernatural ability for the mind or the consciousness to influence reality. Unless you've got a degree in physics, you're probably going to botch your explanation of exactly what the experiment represents and what it's proving, and all of the detail of the physics around that. But that's not to say that experiments like the double slit experiment, and just generally concepts in quantum physics like that there can be an uncaused cause in the form of radioactive decay, and that there can be quantum entanglement where two electrons can make contact and still communicate with each other instantaneously when they're separated by space and time. These kinds of concepts, and just the idea that the world of Newtonian physics is not as solid or fixed or as limited as we thought it was, and that there's all of these different ways that at the deepest level of reality, everything is just fluctuating probabilities, and even space and time are relative. All of these kinds of ideas of quantum physics demonstrate that the universe is much more mysterious than we once believed, and that perhaps we are more interconnected with the universe than we thought we were, and we can influence the fabric of the universe in more subtle ways than we thought were possible before, and that the universe is not as solid as we thought it was, and perhaps things exist more as a probability than an actuality in many respects, and we take for granted that things are more actual than they are. And that is certainly a view that is compatible with the supernatural explanation for magic, so-called. It's not truly strictly supernatural because it's still working within the laws of nature. We're just expanding our understanding of what the laws of nature are. David Bohm's idea of the implicate order and the explicate order is another kind of idea which is very compatible not only with a universe, not only with the idea of a universe that contains magic, but also with the view of the universe that the mystics of old promoted, about the way that this universe has come into being from an absolute infinite reality where there's no distinctions between things at all. So that's what I'd say about scientific explanations about how magic works. We need to be careful in assuming that the science of our own time is the science that can explain something supernatural, because this is not the first time that people have attempted to explain magic or the supernatural in this way. When the radio and television first became popular, people tried to talk about magic in terms of like a radio wave that got sent out or a frequency that got sent out. And when electricity was first used in inventions in the 19th century, it was popular to talk about spiritual phenomena in terms of electromagnetic energy and things like that. So in conclusion, how does magic work? I don't know. Often it's just a matter of hacking your own mind and reprogramming your consciousness so that you can perform at a more optimal level. And if that's your only understanding of magic, then that's fine. You'll be able to do great things using magic and the law of attraction, using that paradigm. But be open to the possibility that there's something supernatural going on, albeit we still don't have a plausible explanation for it. And pop physics and the latest pseudoscientific theory will not do justice in providing an explanation for why magic works, something as grand and mysterious as that. So those are my concluding thoughts. What do you think? Leave your comments down below. Please hit that subscribe button to support the work that I'm doing on this channel. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.